Friedrich Engels, the factory owner's son who funded the revolution against factory owners.
Welcome back. I promised you the irony at the center of my own life, so let us not bury it. I am Friedrich Engels, and for roughly 20 years I worked inside my own family's textile firm in Manchester, a business built on the exact system Karl and I spent our lives arguing needed to be overthrown. And I used the profits from that business to keep him fed and his work printed.
Sit with that for a moment, because it deserves sitting with, not smoothing over.
I intend to. My father sent me to Manchester in 1842, partly to toughen me up and partly, I suspect, to pull me away from radical politics back home in Germany. Instead, I spent my days managing a cotton mill and my evenings walking through the actual working-class districts of the city, the slums, the overcrowded lodging houses, the children working the machines, and I wrote it all down. The Condition of the Working Class in England came out in 1844, before Karl had published any of his major economic work, and it was built on streets I had physically walked, not abstract theory in a library.
And I want to be clear about something the historical record sometimes flattens. That book shaped my thinking enormously. Engels was not my junior assistant filling in details. He handed me the empirical backbone before I had fully built the theoretical frame it would eventually support.
Manchester in the 1840s was the most industrially advanced city on earth, and also one of the most brutal. I documented children as young as 6 working 12 and 14-hour shifts in the mills, life expectancy in the poorest districts running decades below the wealthy suburbs just a few miles away, entire families crowded into single damp rooms next to open sewage. I was not reporting rumors. I had the run of the actual mills, sometimes my own family's mills, and I used that access to document conditions the owners of those mills would rather the public never saw clearly.
Give the audience a sense of just how directly you saw this, because it was not a brief visit.
It was not. I lived in Manchester on and off for the better part of 2 decades, walking the same streets I was managing workers on by day and writing about by night, which is precisely why my book reads less like distant social theory and more like a first-hand inventory of a specific city's suffering, block by block, trade by trade.
Which is precisely the irony you opened with.
Precisely. For roughly 2 decades, I lived a genuinely double life, a respectable, reasonably successful Manchester businessman by day, quietly funneling money to Karl in London to keep his family from outright starvation, while writing in private about the very system providing that money. I am not going to dress that up as some clean, heroic arrangement. It was uncomfortable, it required real compromise, and I made it anyway, because I believed the work mattered more than my own comfort with the contradiction.
And that money was not incidental. Without it, there is a real chance capital is never finished at all.
There is an even harder truth past that, because the story does not end when Karl died in 1883. He left behind 2 more volumes of Capital in genuinely rough, unfinished, often barely legible draft form. I spent much of the rest of my own life editing, organizing, and completing those manuscripts from his notes, effectively finishing his life's work after he was gone, alongside continuing to write serious theory of my. History tends to put one name on the spine of that book. 2 people working under wildly different daily conditions actually built it.
Now we should not let this turn into simple hagiography either, for either of us. Tell them honestly where the predictions failed.
Gladly, because pretending otherwise would insult the seriousness of the work. We both expected industrial capitalism to eventually collapse under its own internal contradictions in the wealthiest, most industrialized countries first, Britain, Germany, roughly where we were both living and working. Instead, the revolutions that actually succeeded in claiming our name happened in far less industrialized places. Russia in 1917, China decades later, agricultural societies neither of us expected to be first in line. That is not a small footnote. It is a real gap between the theory and how history actually unfolded.
And the regimes that eventually governed in our name produced their own enormous, undeniable human cost. Forced collectivization, famine, political terror. Entire societies run by single-party states claiming to speak for the working class while crushing dissent within it.
Serious historians rightly hold us accountable for how directly our language and our theoretical framework got used to justify authority that neither of us, by every honest reading of our actual writing, ever specifically designed or endorsed. We wrote about seizing the means of production, not about show trials or engineered but a theory that gets weaponized that badly, that many times in that many places, cannot simply blame every implementation and declare the original argument untouched. That tension is the honest, permanent asterisk sitting over our entire body of work, and pretending it is not there does not serve anyone.
So where does the theory actually land you today, given all of that?
In a genuinely live, unresolved argument, which is more than most 19th century theories can claim. The gig economy has revived our central question in a form we could never have imagined. A driver or a delivery worker whose actual means of production is an app they do not own, cannot modify, and can be locked out of entirely by a company changing an algorithm overnight. Who owns the means of production when the means of production is code, sitting on a server owned by someone else? That is a genuinely open legal and political fight happening right now, worldwide, over worker classification, algorithmic management and platform accountability.
And the inequality numbers underneath that fight have not exactly settled the argument in our critics' favor either.
They have not. Wealth and income concentration at the very top of many wealthy economies has climbed substantially over the past several decades, a trend widely documented across mainstream economic research, not just our own tradition. That does not prove our full theory correct. Plenty of serious economists explain rising inequality through very different mechanisms than class exploitation. But it does mean the underlying question we asked, who actually captures the value that labor creates, has not gone away simply because our proposed solution came with such a brutal historical cost when certain regimes tried to implement it.
Which brings us to something happening right now, in 2026, that neither of us could have predicted.
A real measurable rise in interest in socialism among younger generations across several wealthy countries, showing up in surveys, in politics, in culture, often among people who came of age entirely after the Soviet Union's collapse and have little direct memory of the 20th century's Marxist state failures. Their critics argue that interest reflects historical amnesia, forgetting the actual human cost paid the last time these ideas were tried at national scale. Their defenders argue it reflects a reasonable generational response to stagnant wages and concentrated wealth, testing old questions against a genuinely new economy rather than repeating old mistakes. Both things can be true at once, and serious people on every side of that argument are having it in good faith right now.
So here is where I will leave my half of this, honestly. We were right that economic structure shapes far more of social and political life than most people comfortably admit. We were wrong badly about the timeline and the specific mechanism of transformation, and catastrophically undersold how badly our language could be twisted once real state power was on the table.
And there is one question our own theory never fully answered, one that started nagging at serious thinkers almost immediately after we were both gone. If workers in advanced capitalist democracies really were being exploited this badly, structurally exactly as we described, why did most of them keep voting, working, and living inside the system instead of rising up the way our theory predicted?
That question outlived us both, and it took a prisoner of an entirely different regime, writing in code to slip his ideas past fascist censors, to actually answer it properly.
Next time, Antonio Gramsci, and the uncomfortable discovery that raw economic exploitation is not enough to explain why people accept the system they live under. Something else has to be doing that work too. See you then.